So here we have Common Comfrey, Symphytum officinale, and it is has such a long history of a very popular herb in Europe. Although it is somewhat controversial because there was a discovery made a few decades ago about a group of chemical constituents in comfrey called pyrrolizidine alkaloids. There's two types of them, and one of the types of pyrrolizidine alkaloids is toxic to the liver. Now, there's a lot of debate about how toxic it is, how much you have to use, but it's one of those things that has sort of gotten in the way of this herb, and in many jurisdictions, you're not even allowed to sell products with comfrey in them anymore. Right now, we're in late May. Things are a little bit early this year, but this time of year, sort of late May, early June, is when the comfrey goes into flower. And the time to harvest it is right around the time that it first goes into flower. This is like almost perfect. You can see this one here, a couple of them of our flowers have already been fertilized, and more of them are opening up. Now, traditionally, a lot of people just use the leaves, but I find it's important to use the leaves and the flowers. And so when I'm harvesting it, I will typically take something like this where it's not all the flowers are fully open yet, not a lot of it's been fertilized, so the flowers aren't that mature, and maybe harvest about that much of it. Now, the problem with that is that a lot of the larger leaves are much lower down, but if we harvest too much of the plant, we end up having to discard a lot of the stalk, and it also is much more stressing out. It stresses out the plant a lot more. So what I'll typically do is harvest like maybe the top third or 40% of the plant, and then from other plants I'll harvest some of the larger leaves from down lower on the plant to up the leaf content relative to stalk. With most plants, when you're harvesting a good chunk of the aerial portion, we remove a fair bit of the stalk, because the stalk generally is a lot weaker than the leaves and the flowers in terms of its medicinal potency, and so too much stalk weakens the medicine that we're making from it. Now, because comfrey stalk is very succulent, the difference in potency between the stalk and the leaves isn't as great as some plants, so we don't need to remove as much stalk. But typically we might remove, if I harvested, say, that much of the plant, maybe there, I might remove the bottom third of the stalk, stripping the leaves and the flowers away from it, and just, I don't use that portion. It goes into the compost. And by the way, comfrey is one of the most amazing things to put in your compost. It's a plant that concentrates a lot of nitrogen in its tissues, and one of the things we do is we take comfrey leaves, you put them in a pail of water, leave it outside covered in the sun for a few days, and when you pick it up, it smells like sewage because it just decomposes, and it makes this really, really good, what we call compost tea. And it's so strong that you end up diluting it, like maybe only 5 or 10%, with the rest being water. And you can use it to water your indoor plants, and you can use it to water your garden. It's really, really rich. Anyway, getting back to its medicinal properties, what we do with comfrey, what it's best known for is its healing properties. It is one of the most powerful, what we call vulnerary herbs that are used to heal wounds of any. Now, the comfrey comes from the borage family, and there are other plants like borage and hound's tongue and blueweed that grow in our area that are from that family, that also contain similar constituents and are similarly really, really powerful healing herbs. But it's used a lot topically for rashes, stings, bites, and wounds, and its effects are incredible. In fact, in some cases, it's actually too effective, because when you have a very deep wound, you want the wound to heal from the inside out. You don't want to seal over the wound on the outside and completely heal that while the inner tissues are still healing. Sometimes when you do that, you can trap bacteria in there, and it can end up abscessing. So with comfrey, you have to be careful about using it on really deep wounds. Usually you don't use it right away, use other herbs, and then bring the comfrey in later when you're confident that a lot of the deep healing is already taking place. Another amazing thing about comfrey is its capacity to heal broken bones and pulled or torn tendons and ligaments, which are traditionally hard tissues to heal. So when you're doing that, there's two different things you can do. You can take it internally because you want to get it into those areas in the blood, or you can take it topically. But because of the fact that with those types of injuries, it might need to be used for a longer period of time, rather than risk taking a lot of comfrey internally with that potential liver toxicity issue, what we usually do is we take it internally in homeopathic potency, which doesn't have the toxicity, and then use it topically in the crude herb form, either as a poultice or an ointment or something like that. So any kind of external scrape, rash, bruise, strain, sprain, broken bones, anything like that, it is a very, very powerful healing herb. Internally, it's also really, really effective for healing similar tissues, the epithelial tissues, right down through the mouth, throat, and the digestive tract. So sore throats, mouth ulcers, ulcers in the stomach or duodenum, other types of inflammatory conditions further down in the digestive tract, gastritis, Crohn's disease, diverticulitis, colitis, all of those things. Now, if the problem is in the colon, sometimes if it's a really serious, like if somebody has ulcerative colitis, by the time the herb works its way down through the digestive tract, it's really, really dilute. So often if you've got a really, really serious inflammatory condition in the colon, what we often have to do is, for at least a period of time, use it as a herb tea enema, so that we get it in a concentrated form into the colon, because when it's taken orally, most of it gets absorbed by the time it gets to the colon, and so it's not necessarily in a concentrated enough form to act as effectively in the colon as it can be higher up in the digestive tract. It's used for also healing blood vessels, bruises, other types of inflammatory conditions of the blood vessels. It's somewhat detoxifying. It's good for kidney conditions, kidney inflammation, and in small quantities it actually benefits the liver, but in large quantities it can be toxic to the liver. Now, because you're dealing with a plant that has this potential liver toxicity issue, we usually put some restrictions on it. For one thing, you don't want to use it if you're pregnant or nursing. You don't want to give it to infants, so babies up to about the age of 1. And some people say you shouldn't use it if you're on open wounds, which defeats the purpose, because that's one of the primary things it was used for. But even when it's used topically, if you use it in concentrated form for a long period of time, some of those pyrrolidine alkaloids will get absorbed into the body. So you got to be careful for sensitive populations, seniors, people who have some kind of history of some kind of serious liver pathology. I'm not talking about just, general liver congestion. I'm talking about something more serious like hepatitis. Somewhat calming to the nervous system, but primarily it's used as a wound healer internally and externally, and also, like I said, for broken bones and tissues that contain a lot of, that are hard to heal, like tendons and ligaments.